Andy and Erkin's presentation and recognize the trajectory it represents. It's not the intellectual project of the school, not by a long shot, but it is a intellectual project of the school. And it's what I'm going to try and explore as one more small facet of the whole thing. So, what was I thinking when I came to Buffalo? I was recruited by Harold Cohen, Mike Brill, to be chair 35 years ago. I suppose that what they told me was that I needed to come to Buffalo because it had every problem in the world I wanted to study. It was actually true. But what I found out was I was coming to join a kind of social movement in our city and region. My partner and professor, Linda Schneekloth, and I dove in head first. The waterfront was on everybody's map at the time we got here, and we were working for WRT at the time with 27 alternatives to vet across a large public. How the hell do you do that? In 1986, we took on the Buffalo Urban Retail Core Design Competition, a competition we managed around the subject of the traffic circle at Lafayette Square and the hope to rebuild a retail base downtown. We didn't save retail, it's far too complicated to discuss here, but we got a lot of ideas and we drew the public's attention to the potential for downtown. We pushed the reclamation of the square we now enjoy. In the early 90s, housing was on the table for the first time. Could you either do parking lots or housing downtown? Well, you can't afford to do housing downtown and you make more money with parking lots. We tried to give them some alternatives. And then with that, with lots of crude expressions of one project or another, trying to understand precisely how to take an existing building stock, lots of sliver buildings, all with lots of code constraints, and figure out how to build housing above what should be stores, but they weren't. There were lots of problems to solve. Students in studios and visiting professionals in BRUDAT workshops worked hard to make the upper story spaces all worthwhile. Mazziella came to office in 1994 to help rebuild inner neighborhoods in the Lower West Side, and here we look at some examples of that effort. Tony, as mayor, also wanted to make a big move to help downtown, and so he organized a group, downtown BOMA, everybody, Buffalo Place, the city, and of course the school, ran a series of major workshops in the studios of WNED, televised, radio, phone call-in, and charrette work by the design professions. He liked that so much, it was so much fun. He said, let's take it out to the neighborhoods, and we spent the next 2 years working neighborhood to neighborhood with the congressional district, or with the councilmatic districts, in an effort to really get a conversation between our citizens and the community, giving them a real stake in the procedure. Overall, we never tried to start from scratch with planning. Public constituencies for waterfront and so forth all helped us aim at specific focused areas for development. It's an ongoing process to say you can just put it anywhere, throw paint on the canvas, so you can actually start to understand strategic places to locate work. The conversations that we began early in our tenure here on the waterfront grew and grew and grew. Ultimately, a dozen studios were done on the waterfront. Hirohata, myself, and several of my colleagues. And it took us to an ability to prepare a $1.5 million proposal to do a serious plan for a waterfront corridor. A whiny little group called the Olmsted Park and Parkway System got together as the friends. They sort of wished things were better. They grew up. They became a $3.5 to $4 million a year operation, and they chartered us to develop the Olmsted Park and Parkway System Comprehensive Plan. Not lacking ambition, we went from there to the idea that there's a river that doesn't divide us from our colleagues in Canada, but actually connects us to our colleagues in Canada. And that combination brought us to a kind of rethinking Niagara, which was lake to lake, both sides of the border. Coming back home, there was an opportunity that engaged the school in its urban design project with the process by which we did the master planning for the north, south, and downtown campuses. That master planning re-envisioned Buffalo and re-envisioned the relationship between the city and the neighborhoods, and then took us out to another kind of way of thinking about that, which is you can't afford to keep sprawling. We took a big run at some of the stats that we all heard from Frank on about what's going on, how we're growing in terms of land use and shrinking in terms of the population. It's an uneconomical and unsustainable practice. That took us to a commission from the federal government to prepare a new way to plan for Buffalo Niagara that didn't assume that there was one God who was going to govern home rule, but rather it was a much larger base. And that base depended on a student capacity, a citizen capacity, that social movement that we talked about before. So preparing that group of citizens to champion for themselves change in each of their 64 municipalities, and to also acknowledge that there is more than just the citizens involved in this relative to the civic and not-for-profit sector, but the whole business sector and its activities are supported by work we now do at the UB Regional Institute in direct support of the Regional Economic Development Council, where we have written economic plans and physical development plans for 2 5-county regions, and in addition to much of upstate New York. All of this has as its base that we have a history of listening to the community. That social movement that I wasn't sure I understood when I got here has been and continues to be a strong force for this university. It supports projects and experiments, frankly, like a very patient project by Howard Zemsky to build a 600,000 square foot Larkin Square, and then ask the question with the university faculty and students here about what next? How does dropping that big rock into a community affect many other things? Lots of conversations around big rocks like that, or even whether to drop them, have been our history throughout the urban design project, and continue a history of engagement, not unlike what Frank was describing when he first started our talk off here with that, and certainly what Bradshaw offered. Thank you very much.